Epic is telling people how blind they are of how great Unreal Engine is. But
No.
then we're not even going to talk about Unreal Engine yet.
Not yet. All right, and then so E3 was supposed to have been coming up, but obviously isn't with everything that's going on.
Rip.
So gaming news is very different this year. And instead of a week of all of the gaming news all at once, or I guess a week in February, March for GDC, and then a week in June for everything else, and then a week in July, September for
Yeah.
Gamescom, we have Summer Games Fest, IGN Summer of Games, all these different things that essentially mean the same thing. Gaming news is going to trickle all summer, which personally I'm very happy about. I know some people prefer the dedicated week of just all the gaming news, but I like just every
Yeah.
day popping into my feed and seeing something actually interesting about gaming
I
every day.
completely agree. I don't like it when I have like feeds that are kind of specific to computing, but whenever E3 would happen, all the computing news is suppressed and I have trouble finding it because
Yeah.
everybody's talking about the games. So I really like the trickle out of information better. And it's I don't know. I've liked the way the PC realm and tech realm have kind of done that for a long time where it's like, here's a new product, here's a new product, here's a new product
Yeah.
several different times a year.
Yeah. So with that, probably every WordCast that we do this summer will have some gaming news. Obviously, some weeks will be more eventful than others, but
Yeah.
and this is a pretty big one, just because of the tech that we're going to talk about. But Epic has announced three major things. The first of which is not directly related to their engine. This is actually something that works on any engine. They specifically advertise Unity, Unreal, Lumberyard, and even like super small engines like Godot. But any engine you can bring the code over to use this with. Essentially, what they're launching is Epic Online Services. And this is a tool to give any game developers, big and small, the ability to implement crossplay much easier. So this works currently with Switch, PS4, Xbox, and PC. However, they are also working to add iOS and Android soon. And this will allow for cross-platform lobbies, matchmaking, actual matches, leaderboards, cross-platform progression, all of it. And it's completely free for developers. So if you're making an indie multiplayer game, something, a unique experience like Journey, now Journey could potentially add this and be cross-platform, which would be really cool. The next big multiplayer AAA game, much easier for them to add cross-platform. It's just all around good for every gamer, pretty much.
But Epic's bad.
Yes, Epic is very bad. They use their money to do things like this next announcement, which is that they are changing how they charge for the game engine. So previously, the way that they charged for the game engine was it was free to download, free to make your game, and then they charged you. I think it was royalties based on if you made more than $3,000 per quarter. So pretty much, if you released a game and it sold a decent, even a small amount, you'd
It'd have to be
probably end up having
considered
to
like
pay.
a successful game, right?
Not even
Basically.
that. I mean, you could spend 2-3 years making a game, drop, $30,000-$40,000, and then make $1,000 a month and have to pay royalties.
Yeah.
Um, and so it was just essentially if you were making actual if you were making money and it was more than just like an art project, you were paying for it.
Yeah.
Well, that's completely changed. So now it's still free to download, still free to make your game, free to release the game, and they only charge you if you make more than $1 million in a year, and they only charge you the royalties on the million and first dollar and above. So
Yeah.
most indie games, even ones that actually do pretty damn well, it is now completely free.
That right there is pretty amazing. So just to make sure that the audience understands, because this was something I had a point of confusion with, is Unreal Engine is associated with Epic. They
Yes,
are Epic. So just
Unreal
to make that
Engine
clear.
is and has and always has been made by Epic.
Yes. Yeah. So
It is
that's
a
something because
core.
Epic
Yeah, it is a.
wasn't as big of a brand until things like Fortnite and the Epic Games Store. So everybody
Mhm.
just called it Unreal Engine and kind of assumed that was the name of the company, right? So
Yeah.
I wanted to make sure that was clear there. And I mean, this right here really just
Oh,
tells me.
one other thing I need to
Go
add.
ahead.
They backdated this to January 1st of this year. So if you're a game developer who released your game 2 months ago, 3 months ago, this still applies to you.
Okay, so that is super awesome. I think all of this just really tells me though how just horrible for the market Epic is. They just don't care about gamers or game developers.
Yeah,
And that right there is unfortunate. No, but
yeah.
in reality, I mean this is amazing. I'm surprised by this personally. I didn't expect them to come out and do this. Obviously, as a company, their goal is to make money one way or another. But thinking on the long term, having more people and more developers have easier access to games and have easier entry into game development, right there is actually going to make you more money in the long run, right?
Hmm.
Just
Well, and then
having more users.
the other thing too is that I mean, we'll talk about some of the tools coming in the next version of Unreal Engine. Um, but and ultimately, there are going to be developers who still want to use Unity for one main reason. Unreal Engine requires C++. Unity and a lot of other engines use things like C Sharp, and a lot of people dislike C++.
Yes, yes.
And so this is going to get people that are just getting started in games. If like, if like, let's say I wanted to make a game right now, I
Uh,
don't have any, I've done a little bit of programming, but I don't have any significant knowledge, any significant attachment to any one language.
yeah.
Now, if I go into this with C++ knowledge and I go to learn Unreal Engine, so I go to learn C++, well, let's say I make a game that goes bonkers and does amazingly well, and Epic likes me and wants to buy my team or buy my IP or whatever it is and employ me. Well, I already know C++. It makes acquisitions easier. It makes anyone
Yeah.
joining any dev team that uses C++ easier. If any studio wants to buy up an indie that made a game on Unreal and that studio uses Unreal, that's so much easier for them. That's a game changer, which is actually much bigger for Microsoft than Sony, which is funny because Unreal Engine 5 was demoed on the PS5.
Yeah.
But it's just bigger games don't. I mean, there are a lot of big games that use Unity, but like a lot of first party games and a lot of the bigger third party games don't use Unity. And
No, no, no,
so
absolutely not. No, it's more
getting
common to
indies
see. Go ahead. Sorry,
getting
there's a
indies
delay.
onto a C++ base engine, I think is it's going to be something more difficult for indies, but they still have the choice of which route they want to go. But if they start with C++, then it's going to be easier for them to adapt and move into a lot of larger studios.
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure. And so it's just out of the larger engines is a incentive for smaller people to start with them instead. And that makes sense. I mean, Unity is a lot of times still considered a small engine that's really for indie and stuff like that, not for the bigger developers. And just this right here is just incredible. Now
Yeah,
to make sure I understand, you might have said it earlier and I may have just missed it. The engine is also free, correct?
correct.
Okay, so the engine's free, no royalties, and you can post it on the Epic Store for free. And it's
Yes,
easier to do crossplay.
and it's easier to do crossplay. Well, any engine, it's really easy because you just adopt the code. It's not actually
Yeah,
easier
you're
in
right.
this
Okay, I
case.
guess it's not. Well,
Um,
it may still be easier because it's probably already readily available for it. You know what I mean?
yeah, but from my understanding, it's the way that they have set up the Epic Online services.
Uh huh.
It's pretty much just you
Just like kind of
put
plug
the
and play
code in and
almost.
that's it. Yeah. It's designed to be extremely easy. Because they want indies to be able to do it is the big thing.
Right, right.
Most big companies could do it on their own. They don't need this.
That makes sense.
Um, but the other thing, too, and back to the engine thing that I was discussing, a lot of the bigger engines use C++. I know that like CryEngine can use multiple languages, but C++ is the big one, I believe.
Which also should
That
line
it
up with Lumberyard then, because Lumberyard's kind of based on
correct, yeah,
CryEngine.
yeah.
Yeah. So that right there, I mean,
And
that's a huge thing there because those are some of the biggest graphics engines, right? So
mhm,
you're already capturing two huge segments of the larger market there.
yeah. So, I mean, personally, I love this move. It's going to be interesting to see how Unity responds because while Unity has the advantage of the easier programming language, you have to pay $1,500 for the professional edition license,
Mm.
and their royalties are starting at $100,000 rather than a
So it
million.
already makes more logical sense to go this way anyway then.
Yes.
Like I feel like unless you know the languages for Unity already because you've either programmed in Unity or that's what you've learned for whatever reason,
Yeah.
there isn't really a great reason to go with it over this now. So
Yeah.
now, I mean, I'm hoping that this sparks some competition in the game engine world, though. That's what I would like to see. Is I would like
Mhm.
to see game engines that are cheaper, that are free, that have lower royalties and stuff like that.
Yeah. And
That helps the gaming market as a whole, and I would even like to see some more open source game engines. But
yeah. And Epic clearly wants to get more people into game development too, and I think this is a big step to do that. If you can use the same engine that most or like a significant amount of Microsoft studios are using, and the same engine that is used for games like Gears, then
yeah,
like that's already like exciting. If you can do that for free, and if your game happens to sell well, you're not like going to be hurting for money. But
right.
they make, if you have the Epic Store, they make the um, Unreal Engine like a. Oh, I just should not have opened that because that darkened my
The
screen.
Dark
Um,
Engine.
yes, they put Unreal Engine right below your friends list in the Epic launcher. Like they want people to see and click on and try it.
Okay, okay, interesting.
And
I didn't.
they
I wasn't
have
aware of that.
Yeah, and they have, like, when you first open it, they have stuff to learn how to make things. They advertise the Epic Online services. They have a marketplace to get assets, and there's a lot of free stuff in there. And I've mentioned to you, and we'll talk about this more with Unreal 5, but there's these things called Quixel Megascans, and you can get some stuff from their service for free if you're using Epic. And so they're doing all these things like, okay, you might be able to learn programming, but you're not going to also necessarily want to be an artist. And if you can pretty cheaply buy an animation system from their marketplace and get assets for free, and you just have to do the programming, that makes it a hell of a lot easier to make a game.
It
And if
removes a
you
lot of the barriers of entry, I think.
Yeah.
And then at that point, it's just if you want to do it, all you have to sacrifice is
Mhm.
time, not
Yeah.
money. And that is something that I feel like impacts, and I know it has me personally, impacts creators as a whole, not just
Mhm.
game devs, but creators as a whole. Is if you have to spend money in order to really get into it, then you run into this wall where you have to spend time to earn money so that you can spend time to do the thing that
Mhm.
you're interested in terms of creation. And like that's a wall that I've hit, is like buying camera equipment, streaming equipment, stuff like that. And I know that game developers run into the same thing, but I think sometimes even to a to a larger extent.
Mhm.
um and because it's hard for one person to do the entire thing, and a lot of times game developers end up being a group of people, and then the costs start to go up again.
Yeah.
Everybody has to have workstations capable of working on it and stuff. So this just removing as many barriers of entry as possible, so that it is down to just having the ability to use the software, and then your time is enough right there to benefit the entire gaming market. And so I'm glad that they're going this direction. I wanted to get your opinion, and well, I guess I'll let you finish first. It's Unreal Engine 5 related, so I'll wait till we're there.
Oh, okay. Then yeah, let me explain that then, because actually you set up a perfect transition to that. If we're talking about making things easier for developers,
Yeah.
um, Unreal Engine 5 does that on so many levels. So this was expected or originally planned to have been announced at the Game Developers Conference, along with Sony's PlayStation 5
Hmm.
event. And for those that didn't watch it, it's probably fine that you didn't unless you like super technical discussions. Sony's PS5 event was very dry and super technical,
It
and
was, which I
was
loved,
not
but
very hype building. I really enjoyed it because the specs were super interesting, especially since it's a unique console. It's not just PC hardware in a box necessarily.
yeah,
Um,
which is essentially what Xbox is at this point.
yeah. So I was already excited from that, but they were planning on doing that, and then at the same time, Unreal was going to show their first demo running on a PS5, and this was going to be our first look at what next gen consoles can potentially do. And so they dropped this as part of the Summer Games Fest last week, and they showed a 9-minute demo of essentially like a tech demo that they had made just to show off the features. It was, the art style and everything is clearly designed to show off the geometry ability and things of the engine. But let's talk more specifics. So the first thing they announced was some new tech that they are calling Nanite. Now, in this, they called it, or they said it was truly virtualized geometry. And what they mean by that is currently when you're making a game, you make your asset, you make, a really intricate 3D model. You can't just put that model in the game and have it render. I mean, you can, but the game's going to run like shit. What you
Yeah.
have to do if you want to import a really high quality asset, whether it's a ZBrush model. It's a photogrammetry scan, which is going to be really big for next gen games, or really any art asset at all. Is you take the asset, especially if it's a 3D asset, and you have to see how it works in the engine, and then optimize the asset. And then even once you get it optimized, you can't just run that optimized asset. You have to get normal maps if it's a bumpy asset to get the shapes of it to actually show. You have to then also create LODs, which are level of detail files. So as you get closer to an asset, if you notice the pop in, and it's obviously sometimes less noticeable as you get closer, they don't pop in as much, but they're actually running or loading in different versions of that asset at different levels of detail, which is
Which
why
right
they're
there
called
actually
LODs.
increases data usage and other stuff like that.
Yeah.
So like
And
that
so
this already helps with
it's a
yeah.
ton of work for developers, for artists. Like they spend probably half, if not more, of their time not just making the art, but actually making the art and then downgrading the art.
Right,
And
right.
that's a huge issue. And you can't just, and if you want to make, let's say you're a developer who's thinking ahead and you are like, I want to make an asset that'll work now, but then if we decide to do a graphics upgrade for future PC hardware for next gen consoles, or we want to remaster the game, if you decide to take the time to make an even higher quality asset, that's kind of a waste of time for 10 years. You might as well just make the one at the highest tier of what you could utilize now, and
Yeah.
then make the new one in 5 years, because the higher detailed one is useless for those 5 years.
Right.
And so it really changes how things are made. And they talked in this about Quixel megascans, which I didn't know what that was, so I looked it up. Quixel is like a specific place that makes art assets and scans things, hence the scan. Um, and they have like pre-optimized game assets. And if you go into Unreal Engine's free section on their marketplace, you can download game optimized Quixel Megascan assets. However, you still have to go in and make LODs for some of that stuff. And so even if you get free assets online, it's still time consuming to really make work well if you want to have like a high fidelity 3D game. And what they're doing with this is, when they say truly virtualized geometry, for those that have done some photo editing or at least know what vector images are, it's like essentially just, you know, the outline of the image and you can adjust the size very easily. This is kind of that. You can take the asset, the engine handles every aspect of downscaling it to the further away distances. So as you approach it, you just get closer and it just changes how the triangles load.
You know what would
Um,
be interesting is this might actually give consumers a certain level of control as well, as where you could have a slider for distance as we have in games currently, but instead of distance of this is how far out things render, it can be more dynamic than that. Whereas if you increase your render distance, things don't just render further away, but things that are further out render at a higher quality level than they would before, even if they were previously visible. That kind of stuff too.
Yes and no. So I don't know the specific. I'm not that knowledgeable on game engines. I have no
What, you
experience with
haven't
them,
made a AAA game?
nor have I made a game engine. um, but from my understanding, with the way that this works, is that based on the hardware available, and I mean,
Mm,
obviously, if you change the settings, you might override this, but based on the hardware available, it just loads as much triangles as it can down to the pixel level, but
oh, okay.
it's not going to do more than the pixel level, because that's pointless.
Yeah.
The whole goal is to get it so that ideally any triangle of any shape of any object on screen that matters, the triangle that matters most would be the one that's shown. And as you get closer, different triangles will matter, but as long as you're rendering the same amount of triangles as you are pixels, so that every single pixel is its own thing,
Yeah.
you're getting as much detail as you can, and adjusting that more isn't really going to help at longer distances, because you can only display so much.
No, okay, okay, that's true. That's true. That
So that's my
actually
understanding.
didn't.
Maybe I'm
Yeah,
completely wrong. If anyone happens to understand this stuff better, please feel free to leave a comment on the video and prove me wrong. But from my understanding, it doesn't seem like it's something that would actually help get more detail than you can already essentially get from this, because it's already doing as much as it can.
yeah,
Um, And so that is going to be huge for game develop for especially for artists within the game development side of things. But even if you're just getting started in game development, if you can just download assets and throw them in, and you don't have to take the time to learn how to alter them to make them work better and to make them optimized, then that's huge for new people getting started.
We're seeing this pattern of developer friendliness
Yeah.
from Epic on a lot of different ends.
And then also when you look at, AAA games, especially for AAA studios that want to be smaller, that aren't trying to go the route of like the Assassin's Creeds where you have 10 studios working on a game.
Yeah.
Um, because for those that haven't seen, a couple of people that worked at Respawn have left and made their own studio, and they specifically said that one of the goals is to, in order to better be able to improve conditions for employees, they want to have less employees. And so with that, they want to be able to try and make AAA quality titles with less staff. And
Yeah.
this type of thing is going to go a long way for that. If you can have, artists the entire time that they're spending at your, at work, sorry, the entire time they're spending at work is spent making the new art instead of making art, and then I'm sure most artists don't like taking their art and just downgrading it half their time. And
Yeah.
so if they
Yeah.
can just make art, it's probably going to be much more enjoyable of a job for them if they can spend their entire time doing that. And it means you need less people to get the same work done. Or in the case of um, indie AA size studios, that just means you can get more work done and make your game look better in the same amount of time. Because
Yeah. Yeah.
generally, art isn't what takes most of the time in the game development process. You make the art, and then while the developers are doing the rest of the development, you optimize that art. And you
Yeah.
probably spend most of your time up to the launch day optimizing that art so that it can be as little of a performance impact as possible. Well, now you can just make art up until it's time to finalize the game.
Yeah, and that right there, I mean that's a benefit for our artists, but I mean going into the realm of AAA again, is that could even benefit AAA development of not necessarily just being able to lower staff if that's what they want to do, but also just increase the capacity of what they're trying to do, right?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so
If
if
you
you
can
give
spend
more
more
time,
time, yeah, if you can spend
yeah,
more time on
yeah,
the art, you can make better art.
right, right. Either better art, which can lead to better graphics, better textures, that kind of stuff, or potentially, a lot of people are skilled in different um or in multiple areas for doing game
Mhm,
development, and so you could potentially have the artist where maybe they have some time to work on some other aspects of the game as well,
mhm.
and side quests or whatever it may be, right? Or just adding more art, not just better art, but more art, more things that add more realistic detail to a game, especially with the cusp of VR, where how many books you have on a shelf and how many pens you have over here and cards you have over here are actually starting to matter. They're not just
Mhm.
there for tiny aesthetic things.
Yeah.
Being able to have more time to focus on that kind of stuff is also a big deal.
Mhm. And it can help
And
a lot
then,
for, a lot, especially like artists might move into design, I feel like a lot more than some other things. And so
yeah,
like if, if you're an artist and you finish 6 months before the game drops, well, if your AAA studio wants to release, really good, like actual substantive add-on content for free quickly after launch,
uh,
if you can have them take time that they already would have normally spent optimizing assets and now just work on that art, it's cheaper for the studio to put out free content later and down the line.
yeah, that's a good point too. Yeah, yeah, it's just lowering costs, which should in theory be beneficial all around. But until we break the every game is $60 mark, that is a little bit harder there in terms of the pricing to a consumer. But
Well, yeah. And one thing I will also say though is like, you and I have both discussed on the show how we think games should be more expensive. They are so expensive to make, and
yeah, yeah.
they
Well,
have
and
gotten way
some
more
should be cheaper.
expensive. Yeah, for sure. But like big AAA games have gotten more expensive to make. That's just a
They
fact.
have,
Anyone
they have.
can disagree with that, but they have.
Uh,
Generally, with new consoles, that jump significantly because to take advantage of that hardware, you need more artists, you need more developers, you need more engine work, all of that.
yeah, yeah,
Well, this not just helps reduce the fact that next gen would require more detailed art, and so therefore would increase cost on the artist end. This cut so many levels that it might help lower the need for potential game price increases in the future.
Yeah, yeah, and that's actually something I want to touch on. Is I get kind of riled up a little bit about the sentiment that DLC, like you see these memes, right, about gamers are frustrated because you bought the game but it's just the hamburger bun or just the bun and not all the ingredients in between until you get the DLC, and people complaining about that. But the reason that that's been happening for AAA, I mean, there's certainly some of it. You look at some of the stuff that EA has done that's just predatory practice, but you look at other aspects of it, and
EA has
a
gotten
lot of,
better.
yeah,
Just
I
want to
know,
say
but
that.
just as an example,
Yeah.
but the reasoning for that is because if they just released the damn game and it was $120, you're not gonna buy it. There's gonna be protests and outrage because the game's too expensive, because there's this understanding that for some reason over the last 20 years games haven't got more expensive to create. And that's where it just that really nicks me personally. Is I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. Like Mario Kart Double Dash was $60. And somehow these games that are just drastically bigger and have a huge team behind them but are only supposed to cost $60. So then the
And it
company
was
tries to,
and the Switch version was a remake.
and then, yes. And then like I just feel like, if you expect them to not do the DLC, either do it as free DLC or do it as like just already included into the game, then you need to be okay with paying more. The reason that a lot of companies are doing it is because you're not paying as much for a game, not because they want to treat you like you're supposed to continue to pay them money.
Yeah. And then the next big tech that they announced, which will also significantly help developers, is Lumen. And what this is a multi-bounce global illumination system. Now, most of the time, if you've paid attention to any ray tracing or anything like that, if you've heard global illumination, you've probably heard it in parallel with hardware-based ray tracing. And what's
Yeah.
really interesting about what they're doing here is that it, in effect, is still ray tracing. Like the idea is that it's tracing rays. So it's ray tracing.
Yeah.
But they're doing it in a software way that is more efficient and therefore doesn't actually utilize the RT cores. And next gen consoles are going to have RT cores as well as, the Ryzen, or not Ryzen, the RTX cards, and presumably RDNA2, since next gen consoles are RDNA2.
Yeah, I would hope that we get that from AMD on PC and not just console, or I'd be very disappointed.
Yeah. And so what we're looking at here is we're looking at a software way to do the global illumination aspect of lighting, which for those that don't know what that means necessarily, simplest way to put it would be in real life, if you light up something, it doesn't just shine the light on just that one spot. It lights up the area around it. And in games, that's not how lighting normally works unless you use some kind of global illumination system. And the more bounces you get, the better that looks. And so if you have a light source at the end of a cave, and you'll probably show at least pictures, if not clips, from the Unreal, so it'll make more
Oh, I
sense.
will. Yeah.
But you have the light source coming from the sky, and then you see how the light in the cave, there's some light. There's no light sources in that tunnel, but you can still see some light in there. That's because light bounces through there like it would normally or
Right.
naturally.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's the point of something like global illumination, is to get a um, more accurate lighting in general. But it's also much easier to do. You can generally make any game look like ray tracing lighting wise if you do enough work, but it's a ton of work. You can get
Yeah.
reflections through screen space reflections, but you can also get reflections by baking them in. Most lighting is baked in manually in games. And so when you look at especially early RT demos where it wasn't really impressive
Yeah.
implementations of ray tracing, compared to games, people were like, they look the same. Like, it doesn't look any better. Why does this matter? Well, it matters because if you can, especially with something like this, where it's going to be more optimized for hardware than like developers having to initially put in ray tracing on RT hardware, which was very difficult because nobody had done it before.
Yeah.
If you can just check a box and as good of global illumination can run as you can get on consoles, oh my god, that's a game changer for game developers.
Now, just to be clear, this is still a form of rasterization, correct? As
Yes.
far as we know. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So this right here, I think, is a big deal. So I think there's a couple things to take away from here. Is obviously, I mean, the better lighting and whatnot, but I think in relevance to, I know you kind of want to talk about this one too. In RT hardware, ray tracing hardware in specific, this is freeing up ray tracing hardware, as you mentioned, and I think that while we expect a massive increase in terms of the ray tracing hardware capabilities of the 3000 series from NVIDIA, and like you said, hopefully RDNA 2 GPUs,
Hmm.
I think this might actually help people running 2000 series GPUs that have RT cores have some level of benefit where you can get the advantage without necessarily having the frame drops that we see where like a 2060 for ray tracing is essentially useless. I have one. I know it's
Hmm.
essentially useless for ray tracing. And even the 2080 Max Q in the laptop here is like it can do ray tracing, but it's still not the sweet 60 that I want on most games, right? And so a 2080 Ti is pretty close to capable of that. But I think you may be able to see games where they have some of the amazing lighting effects, and then you also have ray tracing to both supplement the lighting and supplement reflections in particular, that make it so a game can run at a higher frame rate on some of these older ray tracing hardwares. And maybe that's what NVIDIA was counting on in some ways too, although it looks like, the 3000 series is coming out. But um,
Yeah,
I,
I mean, from my understanding, there is still going to be. I mean, not from my. There is definitely going to be advantages to ray traced global illumination.
oh, for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
If you watch this trailer, one of the big things is that the way that they're doing this is not actually as instantaneous as they make it sound. You can tell even just watching it at full speed, but if you watch it frame by frame, it takes a
Uh-huh.
couple frames for the lighting to actually update. So when the light source moves, the global illumination aspect of it doesn't actually recalculate right away. It takes however many
I did
milliseconds,
notice
ends up
that.
being a frame or two.
Yeah, yeah, no,
Um,
I totally noticed that. I guess what I mean
and
though is like obviously ray tracing is still going to have its benefit, but if it's easy enough
yeah,
to implement as you mentioned, then you could potentially have the option where higher end ray tracing GPUs do more ray tracing GI, but ones that can't do this instead.
yes,
And if it's
and
easy enough to implement, you just have both and it switches depending on your hardware.
yeah, and then also you could have a situation where game developers can use that hardware for other things. Global illumination doesn't really do reflections
Right.
fully, and so if you have ray traced reflections, and then you have GI for the world, that could be really good. And I'd argue that if you're doing like a competitive multiplayer game with really advanced real time lighting, you should do ray traced reflections because presumably if you're doing this you're going to have some situations you might have if reflections really matter at all, then they could affect the game, and so you
Yeah.
want that to be frame accurate. You don't want that to be 2-3 frames later, because if you're utilizing something where you might check a reflection to check an area before you move in, then having that be accurate instantly is important.
Yeah,
And
no,
so
definitely,
freeing up
definitely.
the ray tracing hardware to do that while still getting the global illumination lighting quality would be awesome.
Yeah, no, and I love this. I think it's amazing. And so this actually leads me to what I wanted to ask about Unreal Engine 5 is, in your personal opinion and experience, do you think this is potentially surpassing in some ways what engines like CryEngine, and obviously we don't know what the new Crysis is like quite yet, but in terms of graphics capabilities, not in terms of ease of use or features,
with
but just
where
in terms of the
CryEngine
raw
is
graphics?
now, yes, 100%.
And
With where CryEngine will likely go via its next announcement, which I'm guessing will become with the Crisis launch.
yeah, no, it's
Prob
true. Well, we've already seen like some of the capabilities of CryEngine's ray tracing and stuff, with the demo,
Yeah,
right?
we've
So
seen the ray
yeah.
tracing, but I'm just saying like the the geometry stuff. I feel like every engine is going to have to implement some form of it
Oh yeah.
because we've already seen, if you've seen the teaser from Bethesda about uh, Elder Scrolls 6 and about Starfield, they've mentioned in when they've talked about those games, what little they've talked about, they've mentioned photogrammetry. Photogrammetry is honestly, from what I've heard from developers, like I've watched developers talk about the Unreal Engine 5 stuff, they've said that photogrammetry is oftentimes useless unless you have a massive team right now. Because what
Mm,
photogrammetry is really detailed scans of an object. And getting a really detailed, really high-end scan of an object, if you then have to go in and optimize and cut down the object and then spend a bunch of time making LODs, is useless because you lose all of the quality of photogrammetry.
And that starts
You
to
could
make it
just
more
make the
expensive
asset at that
too.
point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and then it gets even more expensive because you've got the scanners, you've got the people to scan, you've got the time put in place for the LODs.
Mm-hmm. And you still have to essentially remake the asset as a whole anyway because you're cutting
Yeah,
out so much detail. And so any engine that's going to really be able to utilize photogrammetry is probably going to have to do something like this.
yeah.
Um, and so I my guess, if anyone's going to do it, also have it ready about the same time as Epic, it's probably going to be Crytek and CryEngine. They
Hopefully, yeah. I hope
of the,
their budget constraints haven't made it a problem.
yeah. Well, I mean, they're how much money are they getting from Amazon for Lumberyard?
I'm not sure. I don't know the back end details behind that.
Yeah,
I know
but I'm just saying, like, presumably they're
Lumberlard.
getting something.
Yeah, yeah. I know. I would assume they're getting or got something, and I don't know what the payout was like for that tech, but I'm hoping that they were
Yeah,
able to really do a good job. Which, I mean, it looks like the remaster is going to be beautiful, but we'll wait until it actually comes out.
yeah. And so, like, I would be surprised if CryEngine didn't have that. It's probably something that, I mean, there's no way they didn't see photogrammetry coming, so
Yeah.
they'd have to have started working on it at some point.
What about
Um,
like
y-
Frostbite and other engines like that? Do you feel like there's any comparison at all in terms of graphics fidelity? Again, not in terms of
I
developer
mean, again,
convenience.
not now. This is a huge. What we are seeing in this demo is a huge step up from anything we've seen in any other engine.
Yeah. Okay.
Um,
Which I
I
mean,
do
yeah, they're
think
the
that.
first to announce it, not necessarily the first to do it, right? I get you.
Oh yeah, for sure. Starfield is potentially a couple years away, but whatever engine it's using has this. Like, there's no way that they've talked about photogrammetry as much as they have, and they don't have this.
It's gonna know.
This
It's
type
just
of
it's gonna
thing.
be. I mean, it's Bethesda. It's gonna be a reiteration of an engine that's 12 years old. Let's be real here.
I mean,
And then
I
and then
would.
they're gonna add de novo anti cheat to it.
Yes, probably. Um, but like, I think that this is just the way that game engines will go, and different implementations will be more so what matters. Because ultimately, if there's an engine in development that doesn't have this, that is designed to be utilized by anyone else,
Yeah.
rather than just a specific in-house studio that can make the decisions about whether or not they want to take the time to create LODs and other things. Um, every engine developer who wasn't working on this, if there was any, is probably shitting bricks.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it's a big
Because like,
announcement. Yeah.
yeah, people ask why EA shot themselves in the foot and forced what's it called again? Frostbite.
Yeah.
Forced
Frostbite.
Frostbite across their entire platform or set of studios. Ultimately, the reason that publishers will often do stuff like that, and Ubisoft's Snowdrop engine, for example, is because when you look at how EA and Ubisoft and Activision work, they aren't necessary. While they are a bunch of separate studios, they don't really work like that. They
Yeah.
work like a bunch of teams within one larger studio oftentimes, where they'll make, you might be working on Assassin's Creed for 6 months, and then, okay, you're done with your portion, now move on to Division. And
Yeah.
so having familiarity among the engines matters a lot. But that being said, if Unreal Engine 5 comes out and whoever was making the next version of Snowdrop or the next version of Frostbite wasn't working on this, EA or Ubisoft is going to be asking them why they weren't, because this is a
Yeah.
huge difference for art teams. And it's such a big deal that I feel like every engine's going to eventually adopt it.
Or die.
Yeah.
Kind of adopt or die kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, the in-house engines are all just going to adopt it, I feel like.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I don't think that the third-party ones, I mean, like, if Unity doesn't have it, it's nowhere near as big of a deal because Unity is not made by big AAA
Oh, for
games,
sure.
big
Yeah.
game
Yeah.
studios are used by them. And so, like, for the big engines though, they all have to do it. They just have
Definitely.
to.
Yeah. Yeah. So this game that's coming out, I want you to be the one that talks about this as well because I don't know a ton about it. I've just seen the demo.
Yes. So Ghost of Tsushima. This is an interesting one. This was actually announced back in, I think it was 2017 or 2018. Sony hasn't actually announced any new games in years. It's kind of wild. They've been holding
Yeah,
their games
yeah,
for PS5.
yeah.
But they announced Ghost of Tsushima and then went silent on it. They showed a couple trailers and that was about it. And at the time, there was no real samurai games out. Sekiro was coming soon, but this was announced the same, I believe, the same E3 or same like game announcement window as Sekiro. Um, and so this
Has
is
that
a
been has
samurai.
that come out yet, Sekiro?
Yeah, Sekiro's been out for a
Okay,
bit.
okay.
Um, and so this is a samurai game. However, based on the gameplay demo we got this week or last week, I guess, it looks a lot like a combination of the feudal era Assassin's Creed that a lot of people have been asking for, as well as Breath of the Wild, which very much excites me because I have
Yeah.
both loved Breath of the Wild and really wanted feudal era Assassin's Creed.
Uh-huh.
So
I think
all
you
around a
yeah.
win for me. Um,
Now,
um,
is this PlayStation exclusive? It is, right?
yes, it is
Yeah.
made by Sucker Punch, who made Infamous,
Okay. Yeah, that's
and
right.
it
That's right.
is, they are completely owned by Sony.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, and so this game, um, for one, it looks beautiful for being on a PS4 Pro. I do want to see what the
Yeah.
PS4 version looks like. I'm very curious as to how much worse that's going to look because obviously it's going to look a lot worse. But
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I when I saw it on PS4 Pro, like it didn't take long, but it took me a second to realize this is not a PS5 demo. It was
yeah,
very, very. I was impressed. You know, I started to
and
see, okay, I can see the limits of view distance really heavily and things like
yeah,
that. But
I also can't wait to see what a PS5 optimized version of this game is going to look like.
which did they confirm is happening?
No, they did not. They are not
Okay.
saying anything. Sony officially has not said or shown anything about PlayStation 5 like software at all. Unreal has
That's
shown us
weird.
way more than Sony, completely. Well, a lot of it comes down to the fact that Sony's plans were destroyed with COVID. They
Oh,
from
right,
what
right.
we know, the plan was GDC to show developers this for the first hands-on real-time demo of anything on PlayStation 5 to be at GDC, and for the first hands-on with the controller to likely have been at GDC. Like
Yeah.
GDC was supposed to be the start of it, which is normal for Sony. They showed off PlayStation VR at GDC. I believe they showed off PS4 at GDC initially in the same way. And so what they have likely for years had as plans got thrown out the window.
Which is just rough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so now what we're expecting is June, very early June, potentially the 2nd or the 4th to be when they do their initial announcement of games and stuff.
Okay.
But even then, I don't think that they're actually. They might say Ghost of Tsushima is getting an upgrade, but what they don't want is they don't want people to wait to buy Ghost of Tsushima until they get a PS5.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so
that's
I
you can
don't
probably
think
shoot
they're going to
yourself in the foot
show
there.
that for Ghost of Tsushima. I also don't think they're going to show us Last of Us 2 on PlayStation 5 until
Yeah.
after those games have launched.
I think you're
Um,
probably right. Yeah. That
yeah.
makes the
So
most logical sense.
yeah, back to Ghost of Tsushima real quick. Like gameplay that they showed. What's really interesting is that the HUD is very minimal. Um, Really, you'll have whatever objective you have selected. The text of the objective will be up top, but it won't show you where to go. If you want to know where to go, you either open up the big map or you literally call upon the wind to show you where to go. And it will like blow a gust of wind in the direction that you need to head. And it's really
That's
cool
yeah.
because, like, for me, I really loved just going into Breath of the Wild and looking around and deciding where to go and exploring.
Yeah, no, those big open world games have to be done in a way where you get a sense of exploration. If you're just told
Mhm.
where to go, it might as well be linear anyway.
Yeah.
So I like the direction they're going with this as a kind of more immersive experience, versus a technical experience, which
Yeah.
makes sense for something that's supposed to take place long ago. You know.
Mhm. And then, in addition to wind guiding you, there's some more obvious stuff like smokestacks that you'll decide to go to find a fire where somebody's sitting at and talk to them or help them, stuff like that. But then, even then, the animals in the game will guide you to certain things. So you might be going down a trail and a bird flies by and starts like kind of going near you, and you realize, oh, this bird isn't just an effect, it's actually guiding me to something. It's guiding me to a point of interest within the game. Um, Foxes within the game will show you where shrines are, and those shrines are how you get upgrades. Kind of like Breath of the Wild, but it's not like you go in it and do a puzzle. It's just you go to the shrine and you get the upgrade.
Right.
But you kind of get guided by the wind, the birds, the foxes, whatever other animals they might have in the game. And it's like this
It's
world kind
really
of guides
unique.
you around. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I
Um,
appreciate what they're doing with it.
and so I'm very excited about the exploration aspect. The combat aspect is also very interesting. It's very Assassin's Creed like, especially if you go in as how they call it the Ghost, which is essentially a ninja. In feudal era Japan, that's seen as a dishonorable thing. Samurais fight people, sure, and they kill people, sure, but that was like there was an honorable way to do that. You'd have these showdowns.
Hmm.
And if you play as the samurai side, you can do that. You can like walk up to an area where you're supposed to be infiltrating, and you can first guy you see have a showdown with them, fight them. Other people might come up after you've killed him, but you've done your like honorable fight to start this off.
Yeah.
Whereas if you go in as the ghost, that is seen as dishonorable. We don't know yet how much that's going to matter in the game. Um,
Right.
it's possible that it doesn't matter at all, but you know, if I remember correctly, with Infamous Second Son, you had quite a bit of leeway as far as morality goes, and you could do
You
things that were
did.
good or do things that were bad, and that would
Yeah.
affect
Even
the
the
game.
OG Infamous was famous for that.
Yeah, and so like it would make a lot of sense for the same developer to implement something like that in the game.
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
talked
Totally.
about how enemies will grow to fear you if you play as the ghost. And one of the things that we saw that was really interesting was, so there's been other games that have, they've had like audio cues that somebody was scared or they would just turn around and run away. But there was
Yeah.
actually a guy like on his back, like crawling away, trying to just get away from you because he was so terrified he didn't want to get up.
Yeah.
And like
Yeah. I remember
that's
seeing that. That
wild
was that was interesting.
to have like an actual game mechanic around that.
Well, it helps
Um
with the realism and immersiveness, which is what they've been focusing on with this. It
yeah.
helps it feel like you're really taking a part in this, where people are reacting to you
Mhm.
very directly and very emotionally and physically, not just dialogue.
Yeah. And then for the samurai side, I want to know how the controls are going to work,
Yeah.
because one of the things that people are concerned about after having seen that is there's a lot of one-hit kills, which makes sense. Samurais were precise; they knew how to kill people. If you weren't fighting another like well-trained person and you're very skilled with a sword, you probably could get a one-hit kill.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we want to know how that works. Like there was some enemies that had armor, and so obviously you'd have to break through that. There was some enemies that had um, the ability to defend. Is it just that some enemies are one hit kills and some aren't? Or is it that you have to, they talked about how certain stances would matter for fighting enemies. And so maybe you have to be in the right stance to get one hit kills against enemies. And you might have a variety of enemies that only some are in one stance and some are in another.
Right.
Who knows how that's going to work? I just want to see more on that to really be able to tell. But it looks interesting. I'm very excited. I will definitely try both. I'm definitely going to pick up this game.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it looks very interesting. If I had the time and had a PlayStation, I'd probably buy it too.
Yeah.
um. So Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1+2 remake. So I wanted to, before we talk about some of the interesting stuff around that, I did want to throw out that there was some newer news today, which I don't think I see mentioned in here, that it looks like it's going to be adding in a good amount of microtransactions, which
Oh, it
sucks for
is?
something that's a
Is
remaster.
it like just cosmetics or?
I did not read into it in detail. I read like an intro paragraph, so it was
Uh,
something I wanted to bring up while we were talking about it. Hopefully it's just cosmetics. Hopefully, are you looking it up? Is that what you're doing?
yeah, I'm trying to. Yeah.
Okay, hopefully it's just cosmetics. If it's not, then that's frustrating for a game
I don't
that's
know what
literally
they
already
would.
made.
Yeah, I don't know what they would do that wouldn't be just cosmetics. And like honestly, if they end
Yeah.
up having like extra costumes, I don't really care.
Yeah, right. No, I
It
agree.
wasn't, especially since it wasn't the type of thing where in the game originally you unlocked the stuff. If they were to like have it so you previously unlocked visuals and then or like unlocked cosmetics and then they decided to move that to microtransactions,
Yeah,
that would be
as long
really
as it's
bad.
new, yeah.
Yeah. Um, let's see. Speaking on the matter, according to GameSpot, let's see who is. One sec. Head of Vicarious Visions. We're not planning on having monetization at launch. Because they want people to get the full package. They didn't clarify no microtransactions, but they didn't actually say that microtransactions might come. They said additional content.
Oh, okay.
And they said buying stuff with real money. Now, there's a lot of ways that could work. It could come in the form of additional skaters, for example, which quite frankly would make sense. They'd have to pay to get the skater in the game. And so if they wanted to add other people that weren't originally in it, makes sense. There has also been a lot of talk of potential for them to eventually they'll probably do Pro Skater 3 and 4, or at least 3. And so whether they do that as its own thing or maybe they do it as DLC to this, that would still be monetization.
Yeah,
So
no, that's true.
we'll see how they end up doing it, but
Who's
they
the
haven't given
publisher on this?
specifics. Activision.
Okay.
Activision
So that
has
does
the Tony
worry
Hawk
me a
games
little
rights.
bit, but
Yeah.
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 Not
We'll
happy
see,
with
but
Activision.
it seems like Vicarious Vision, and to be fair, of the things Activision has done right recently, it's been the remakes.
That's
I
true.
think they did
That's
some
true.
some microtransactions in Crash Team Racing, but I
Yeah.
believe that was the only thing that they've done anything that people even had complaints about as far as the remakes go.
Well, and if I'm being honest, Modern Warfare is actually quite well done too.
Yeah.
They did a pretty good job with that. There's not too much pay stuff. So as long as they don't do a bait and switch later, it's pretty well done. So
Yeah.
maybe they're trying to make improvements because of the negative sentiment around them.
Yeah. And so some other details about Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2. So the remake is coming September 4th. It's launching on PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and it will be on PC, not via Blizzard's launcher, which you'd think it would be since it's an Activision game. It's an Epic Game Store exclusive.
I was semi-surprised, but not too surprised.
Yeah, that's a weirder one for me because they have the option of taking, yes, they're getting a payout, but generally the Epic Game Store payouts aren't a bunch of extra money. It's upfront.
Right, yeah.
And so, like, they'd make more money with it being on the BattleNet launcher unless they're planning on moving away from that.
I mean, it wouldn't surprise me some of the moves this company makes. Maybe they're going to move out of it, which there's too many damn launchers.
I mean, maybe they're just planning on having the BattleNet launcher be for their competitive games.
That could be it too. Yeah, we'll see. That might be the direction they go, which also makes sense. BattleNet,
Yeah.
Battle.
Well, and then like the people that play competitive games heavily often, I mean, yes, they, I'm not going to like generalize it too much, but like a lot of people that play competitive games heavily primarily play competitive games.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of people that play, like sure, some of them might then go to Tony Hawk, but people that are really interested in Tony Hawk, really like planning on dumping a bunch of hours into that, and we're really big on, like the Crash Team Racing or Crash Bandicoot, Insane Trilogy and stuff like that. The people that generally dump a lot of time into those games don't have the time to dump into competitive games most of the time. You have only so much time for games, and so you generally pick story or casual games or sports games or whatever, or competitive shooters.
Right.
And so maybe they're just trying to segment that off and take advantage of the wider marketplace. Because I mean, I imagine it's only timed exclusive to the Epic Store, so it'll probably come to Steam.
That's usually how it goes. Yeah.
Yeah. And the developers of this are Vicarious Visions, which, for those that don't know, on top of the fact that they did the Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy, which was pretty well done, they've also worked on Tony Hawk Pro Skater games, both for console, and they did pretty much all of the handheld Tony Hawk Pro Skater games in the past. And so that actually confused me because this game is not coming to Switch as of now.
Yeah. Maybe
and
it
yet
will, though. Maybe.
Yeah. My guess is they just wanted to make sure and do the 4K graphics, right?
Yeah. Remaster.
Yeah, do the upgraded graphics right, and then figure out getting it on Switch and downscaling it later.
Yeah. Which is, I mean, it might even, who knows? It might not even be later. It might be like very slightly later.
I feel like if it was going to be relatively close to launch, they would have announced it.
Maybe. Yeah, I don't know.
My guess is that they probably have another studio working on the port,
Porting it, yeah, that could be too.
and that they are waiting to put significant work. They were waiting to put significant work into it until
Yeah.
this game was like feature complete,
Uh-huh.
because they don't want to fuck with the skate code. They're That's another big thing. They are not actually redoing the code for the skating. They are taking the handling code from the original games.
Which is something that a lot of people are going to appreciate.
Yes, because they technically have already remade these games. There's a Tony Hawk Pro Skater HD, which has some levels from each of these games and completely different handling code. And a lot of people
Yeah.
didn't like it because of that. I still think it was good. It was fun. I own it. I've played it a lot, but it didn't feel like the OG Pro Skater games.
Right, right, right. And that's something that's important for long-term fans to do.
Mhm.
So, I think it's cool.
Yeah.
I do. Um I hope it turns out good. So, this is a little bit of a quicker one here, this next topic, but uh I don't know if you've ever played it, Daniel, but
I tried
Planet Side 2.
I tried PlanetSide 2 with a friend a long time ago.
Okay,
Played
okay.
it for I think a week or two, and then we dropped it.
Okay, okay. So I've put like probably 15 hours into it, nothing super
Mhm.
significant, but I played it a long time ago. PlanetSide 2 is a game that's been around for like 8 years, and it was really popular because it's a massive multiplayer online shooter. It is not a story driven shooter. It is like a war based shooter where you fight other groups of enormous amounts of people, and I'll get into the numbers of how enormous these games really can get. But the developers kind of left PlanetSide 2 for a little while, trying to do PlanetSide Arena. And the idea was they were trying to kind of take the concept of how big of a game they made there and make a battle royale sort of style game. They wanted something, their goal was something that could get a close to as big number of people into a setting for a fight faster than what current PlanetSide 2 is, because battles in PlanetSide 2, there's a long lull, before you
Mhm.
actually start to do a battle. So anyway, that ended up being a kind of failure. So they have moved back to PlanetSide 2, and they have at least verbally, there's no real like terms of service commitment here or anything, but they've kind of verbally committed to 7 to 8 years of development, which is doubling what there
Mhm.
currently is, where they're just over 7 years right now. And they released a big update actually to PlanetSide as well that made a big can't remember the name. It's PlanetSide 2 Escalation. That added a lot of content to the game. Now they also potentially might try and do things like DirectX 12 implementation. They recently switched it over to DirectX 11. Again, this is an older game, so it was running on DX9.
Mhm.
And the first thing I'll say about that is I do hope that they do something about the graphics. The game runs really smoothly, and the graphics aren't like awful, but they're definitely old. And honestly, just taking their textures and bumping the resolution up without bumping up polygon count, without bumping up lighting detail or anything else, that would help a lot. Because when you look at a wall and the wall's blurry, it's like, okay, come on, let's get a little more modern here. So I would like to
Yeah.
see some work done, at least on the texture front, if they don't do any other graphics work. But all in all, I would like a graphics revamp. But I'm just really excited for this game to be coming back, and I'm gonna start playing it again. I assumed it was gonna die soon,
Mhm.
but it definitely has not. And PS4 in theory should be getting the big escalation update at some point. They're working on that port, and then PS5, they're saying might get the game, but there's no official word on that or other consoles getting the game. But the big thing I want to say is to really get an understanding of how massive the game is, and so they actually broke the world record fairly recently. I think it was this year. They broke the Guinness World Record for the largest online game at the same, like simultaneous players online. They
Mhm.
had 1,283 people, which again, this is like on the planet, all in the same like vicinity. Not like obviously WoW has more than 1,200 players playing probably at this moment,
Yeah.
but the intention of being like, imagine doing like a 1,200 player raid, right?
Mhm.
That kind of thing. And so that's what's been really impressive here, and what makes PlanetSide fun is it really does feel like you are actually in a war. It's kind of similar to Mag, which was massive action game for PS3, which was 200 an FPS
I
game for
played that game. Yeah.
512. Yeah, that was fun. So imagine that, except you add ships and bigger vehicles, and then you yet double the player count again.
Mhm.
And it would be, I think it's really cool, and I'm planning to start like kind of diving into it again. So
Nice. Yeah. Yeah. For me, PlanetSide 2 just never clicked when I had tried it before.
That's
Um.
something they've worked on actually. Is there's a lot of the introduction to the game is really rough. It's hard to learn it, so they've done a lot to try and help with that and try and get you into what's called an outfit, which is like a clan.
Mhm.
Because it's been that was why I've only played for like 14 hours. I still didn't really understand the game that well.
Yeah.
um,
Um.
Anything else you wanted to add about Planetside 2?
Not really.
Well, let's jump into Doom Eternal and how I'm not playing it anymore, despite it being one of my favorite games of all time.
Yeah, they fucked
So
up.
oh man, they fucked up. And I mean, I pretty much entirely blame Bethesda for this because not only is it something that it sounds like they would do, and it's something that I don't think id Software would ever have the intention of doing, but
Mhm.
also the publisher is usually responsible for adding the anti-cheat features. So Denuvo anti-cheat, which you may know the name Denuvo for their or their DR download rights management stuff that's been really really hardcore, but Denuvo also has anti-cheat software, and this was recently installed into Doom Eternal. Now, the first thing I will say is there was a cheating problem in battle mode on Doom Eternal. However, most people that buy Doom games are not at all buying for the purpose of playing online. In fact, I would say it's an extremely low portion of the player base. I don't have data to back that up, but I would actually be willing to bet my money that almost nobody plays battle mode in terms of like it's probably gonna be one of those games like when people play Crisis 3 online where you end up playing with the same person for like a month in a row because there's not that many people that are really playing it consistently.
Mhm.
So anyway, they added it though because there was a some point of a cheat problem, which I understand them wanting to fix that. But on a single player game, adding what is essentially the hardest core anti cheat system out there is ridiculous. And this
Yeah.
also has kernel level access to your system. It is a security vulnerability in and of itself. Even though it does comply, Denuvo's products comply with GDPR. So they're not directly collecting the data from you that they do have access to because they can access everything on your computer.
Mhm.
But even though they're not collecting that because they have to be GDPR compliant, and believe it or not, I don't think it's too hard to really track what they're looking at. So people could very easily figure that out, prove against it, and sue them and win. So I really do think they're following GDPR practices. But if there's ever an issue, if somebody ever figures out how to crack Denuvo's code, then we're in a real bad situation. But
Mhm.
that's not really the crux of the issue for me personally. The issue that I have is that this has effectively been a bait and switch on the minimum specs of the game. And that
Yeah.
right there is not just anti-consumer, but is almost like I would say available for like some kind of lawsuit. Um, and I kind of hope Bethesda does have some kind of lawsuit that happens because of this.
Yeah.
So there's such a big performance impact from Denuvo anti-cheat, and it's up to 30% measured performance impact, that there are people that legitimately can't play the game anymore. And that right there is an enormous problem. It's people that met the minimum specs and still do, as far as I'm aware, the minimum specs have not been bumped up from this, are no longer getting acceptable frame rates, or people that are close to that minimum spec range. We're like, okay, I can play 1080p at like the almost lowest settings at 60 frames per second, which for a shooter, you do need that smooth 60 FPS, please, especially a really high, fast paced competitive shooter.
Mhm.
Um, Having your frame rate be dropped down to 40 is a big 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 deal. And I have talked to some people on Reddit that have seen an even seemingly bigger impact from this than they have from other games running Denuvo anti-cheat, where they're like seriously losing like 40 FPS.
Mhm.
And so it's making the game completely unplayable for some people. Like people are trying to refund it and stuff because they can no longer use it. And
Wow.
that right there is just such a big impact to me. I'm a huge Doom fan. I've been playing Doom for quite a while. I got into it when I found a good sale on Doom BFG. I think it was the BFG. I think that was the term. Now I'm brain farting, but okay, I got to look that up really quick. It was Doom BFG, right? Yeah, yeah. No? Yeah, Doom 3 BFG edition on Steam. Yeah. So I found that a really long time ago when I first built my first gaming PC and fell in love with Doom kind of immediately. And it's been a great franchise of mine for a long time. And I've bought all the old ones. I'm planning to play through all those too, just to get a sense of the lore and stuff. It's really fun. But this is a big disappointment to me and a lot of other Doom fans because id Software has always done such a great job with optimization and the tech behind it, which is one of my personal favorite aspects of games. And id Tech 7, the engine that Doom Eternal is running on, is no exception. It has been an incredibly good engine. Places like Digital Foundry and stuff have been really impressed with it. It's stable up to the 1,000 frames per second mark. It's really, really, really pretty. There's pretty much no complaints about it other than, and this might not even be specific to the engine, but it would have been nice if they could have had even lower minimum specs, because some systems still do struggle that have fairly powerful GPUs. But
Mm-hmm.
this is just like an impact to a lot of people that have been fans for a long time. I own the book, Masters of Doom, about this, and so it's just like, it's almost a little emotional for me to see this kind of stuff happening with a game that I love so much, and seeing the publisher Bethesda, which I've always been nervous about damaging things like Doom, and they didn't really do it to 2016 very much, but they've really, really wrecked Doom Eternal here, and adding it after the fact is an even bigger problem. If we knew
Yeah.
it was in there ahead of time, that'd be one thing. You could choose not to buy it. They could have different minimum specs and stuff like that. Still wouldn't like it. Still would have bought it. But this is to the point where, like, I don't even know if I want to play it until somebody figures out how to crack it so that I can get rid of that crap.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very fucked. That's
It's
just
yeah.
that's
That's There's not a better word for it.
yeah.
Yeah, it's just bad and sad, and the entire Doom community is just so angry about it, and I think rightfully so. I think it just makes sense to just give it all you got and yell at Bethesda about this, because this is a real problem.
Yeah. We'll see if they change
Okay,
it though. Bethesda's been kind of hit or miss recently. And by hit
they've
or miss, I
been
mean mostly miss.
mostly missed. Yeah, yeah. I mean, Fallout 76. Come on, that never
And
turned out to be a good game.
even the new DLC was pretty poorly rated.
Exactly. Yeah, like the game never ended up. They didn't ever make it good. It was just like, oh, it's shit, and it's gonna be shit the whole time.
Yeah. Like they've tried, sort of failed at
Yep.
making it better.
I
So
tell you though, they better not mess up Elder Scrolls 6, or that might actually kill the company. Like if it's
yeah.
that bad. Yeah, if
Yeah.
it's bad enough and people know that it's bad enough ahead of time and they don't pull a bait and switch, it might very well kill the company.
Yeah. So for reference, the newest Fallout 76 DLC Wastelanders, or the free update, it's a 62 average critic score. 15% of critics recommend it.
Oh, ouch.
Yeah. It's not good.
Yeah, that's bad. That's really bad.
So in
Well,
fact, most of their other DLC or updates have been much better rated than this one. And even then, like their highest, I think, was 74%.
that's just rough. That's just
Yeah.
really rough. Yeah, not a good game. Not a good game at all. It was like a just, let's see if we can make money off garbage.